What happened to Jimmy Hoffa? Hard to believe, but it's been nearly 5 decades, we're talking 50 years, since the labor leader vanished, believed to be on his way to a meeting with 2 top Detroit and New Jersey mobsters.
After decades of fruitless search efforts by America's greatest crime agencies, Jimmy Hoffa's body has finally been found. The details of this discovery and the seemingly ordinary people who solved this mystery still send chills down our spine. For decades, whispers echoed through back rooms, mob hangouts, and government offices alike. Where is Hoffa? His disappearance didn't just become a mystery, it became a legend. Yet, the truth about Jimmy Hoffa remained just out of reach until now. Join us in this video as we explore the details of Jimmy Hoffa's body discovery and what really happened to Jimmy. The initial triggers to finding Jimmy Hoffa's body. Everyone had almost forgotten about Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance, and the world was moving on until 2019, when Martin Scorsese released The Irishman, reigniting the horrors of Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance. Based on the explosive account of Frank Sheeran, the film portrayed Hoffa's final hours with grim detail. Murdered in a Detroit house, his body swiftly cremated to erase all trace. For many viewers, the dramatization offered a chillingly neat conclusion to a mystery that had haunted generations. But almost as quickly as the film stirred fascination, it sparked skepticism. Sheeran's credibility had long been in doubt, and investigators wasted no time pointing out holes in his story. The house he identified as the scene of the crime was combed over with forensic tools. Luminol revealed traces of blood, but none of it could be tied conclusively to Hoffa. No DNA, no weapon, no proof, just more shadows. Even so, The Irishman did what no dig, no tip, no headline could. It brought Jimmy Hoffa back into the spotlight. Suddenly, his story was everywhere again. Debated in classrooms, crime shows, podcasts, and dinner tables. A new generation discovered the mystery for the first time. And in the background, the FBI, prodded by the film's success and the renewed wave of public pressure, dusted off their files and reopened lines of inquiry. The case that refused to die was alive once more. Working quietly, away from the media spotlight, a private group known as the Casebreakers began chasing a lead most had long overlooked. It came from the deathbed notes of a Wisconsin police officer, a clue so strange that it bordered on something cryptic. Among the officer's belongings, his family found a single playing card, the Ace of Spades. On its surface, scrawled in hurried black ink, were just a few words: Milwaukee, third base, old stadium, 1995. Puzzled, the family turned the card over to the Casebreakers, a non-profit team of retired detectives, intelligence officers, and forensic experts with a reputation for digging into some of America's toughest cold cases. At first, the clue seemed absurd, another dead end in a sea of wild theories. But as the team dug deeper, the scribbled message began to take shape. Third base referred to Milwaukee County Stadium, the home of the Brewers, until it was demolished in 2001. The place no longer existed, but old satellite imagery from the late 90s still did. When investigators studied the images, they spotted something odd: a patch of disturbed clay near the third base line. The soil looked tampered with, like it had been dug up and covered over in a hurry. That anomaly was enough to trigger a full investigation. Would there be a digging into the clay, or would sleeping dogs be let to lie? Keep watching to find out. Jimmy Hoffa's body in an unlikely grave. Nothing was going to stop this lead, and so forensic experts and soil analysts were brought in. Ground-penetrating scans revealed layers beneath the surface that didn't belong. The evidence pointed to one chilling possibility: someone or something had been buried under third base. Could this be it? After half a century of false trails, was Hoffa's final resting place hiding beneath a ballpark where thousands once cheered, never knowing the secret below their feet? The Casebreakers refused to let the clue slip away. Piece by piece, the puzzle started to take shape, transforming what once looked like a meaningless scribble into a lead that could rewrite everything we thought we knew about Jimmy Hoffa's fate. The hunt was back on, and time was critical. If the tip was true, the answers had been hiding in plain sight for decades. Their search led them to a patch of land just outside American Family Field, home of the Milwaukee Brewers. At first glance, it was nothing more than an ordinary spot, part parking lot, part youth baseball field. Kids played there daily, their laughter filling the air, never knowing they were standing on ground steeped in whispers of the mob. But this wasn't just any piece of land. In 2002, when Milwaukee County Stadium was torn down, the new field was built directly over its footprint. And right where third base once sat, the very spot referenced in the dying officer's cryptic note, a youth diamond now stood. To most, it was just a place where kids cracked line drives and rounded bases. To the case-breakers, it was potentially a grave. The team moved quickly, bringing in the latest forensic tools. Ground-penetrating radar was rolled out, its sensors sweeping the field, layer by layer, searching for breaks or voids beneath the soil. At first, the radar showed nothing unusual, a clean sweep, uniform layers, nothing that screamed burial site. The field seemed ordinary, almost too ordinary. But as the scans pressed deeper, subtle anomalies began to appear. Tiny shifts in the soil, disturbances where there shouldn't be any, patterns that didn't match natural layering. For the investigators, it was enough to raise goosebumps. Had they finally stumbled onto the place where Hoffa's story ended? Would they really find Hoffa beneath a ballpark? Let's find out. Jimmy Hoffa's body found after decades. At first, the radar scans looked normal, nothing more than the usual layers of soil you'd expect to find at the site. But then, as the machine swept over the old third base area, something unusual popped up. On the screen was a dense, compacted layer of clay, sharply outlined and clearly out of place. This wasn't the kind of formation that occurred naturally, especially not at that exact depth. The ground here had been disturbed, and the strange part? This particular patch of land had gone untouched for decades. So why did the Earth look so different right here, right where the tip had said to look? The anomaly lined up perfectly with the former location of third base. Still, the team knew the radar alone wasn't enough. It was just a reflection on a screen. Striking, yes, but not solid proof. To solve this puzzle, they would have to go further. The scan had given them a clue, but only a fragment of the larger picture. Standing there on the ballpark grounds, the investigators began connecting the dots. That compacted clay wasn't just a random blip. It was the kind of soil someone might use to hide something beneath. Turning to old records, they uncovered another revelation. The section where the anomaly was found had never been excavated. There were no records of any major work ever being done on that patch of land. Nothing that could explain such a sharp difference in the soil. And yet, the radar revealed something impossible to ignore. A dense layer of compacted clay, laid with deliberate precision. The more the investigators thought about it, the more it made sense. This wasn't natural. It wasn't the kind of soil treatment you'd see in normal construction. Compacted clay has a very specific use. It slows down decomposition. It's used in landfills, and sometimes by people who don't want human remains to ever be found. Finding it here, beneath a public ballpark, felt like more than a coincidence. But clay alone wasn't proof. It was a clue, highly suspicious. Yes, but not conclusive. And with a site this public, the team couldn't afford to be wrong. They needed certainty. That's when they turned to the most trusted specialist they had, Moxie, a cadaver dog with an unmatched reputation. Moxie wasn't just any working canine. She was the best, an elite, highly trained dog with more than 200 successful recoveries to her name. Her handler, a retired police officer who had spent decades on the job, had seen almost everything, but even he had the sense that this case and this site would be different. He knew Moxie's nose could uncover what radar and human eyes never could. The scent of decomposition lingers for decades, especially if a body has been buried in haste. When Moxie arrived at the site near Milwaukee's American Family Field, she wasted no time. Her body stiffened, Her nose dropped to the earth, and she moved with laser focus toward the suspected area. Then she froze. A deep inhale, a pause, and without hesitation, she sat. Her tail wagged, signaling what every handler hopes to see. She had found something. But Moxie didn't stop there. She circled back. Once, twice, 3 times, each time returning to the same patch of ground. On the 4th pass, she sat again, firm, unwavering, her attention locked on that one spot. Her handler called it what it was, a high-confidence hit. For the investigators, it was the closest thing to confirmation they could hope for without digging. Radar had raised suspicion. Now, Moxie had pointed them to the same place with absolute certainty. It wasn't proof, not yet. A cadaver dog can sometimes pick up false positives or scents carried by the soil, but the odds of Radar and Moxie both being wrong in the same location? Slim to none. The team acted quickly. Coordinates were logged, photos snapped, and paperwork filed. The breakthrough they'd been chasing for years was finally within reach, and beneath that patch of earth, the truth waited. The next step was the legal hurdle, submitting the request for a formal excavation. It wasn't going to move quickly. These things never did. But after decades of dead ends, no one wanted shortcuts. They had to do this by the book. When the dig finally began, the process was painstaking. Every shovel of dirt was screened, every shift of soil documented. Cameras rolled overhead while forensic experts stood ready to examine anything that surfaced. The weight of possibility hung heavy in the air. If this truly was Hoffa's resting place, it would be the breakthrough investigators had chased for more than 40 years. 2 feet down, the soil changed. The hard-packed clay gave way, and then it happened. Something foreign broke through the earth. Not metal, not plastic, organic, fragile, human. A jolt of silence rippled through the team. For the first time, after decades of speculation and false promises, they were staring at what could finally be the truth. The remains were examined on site. Human, adult, male. It was enough to send chills down every spine at the dig. But this was only the start. Samples were carefully secured and rushed off to the lab. Days later, the results arrived. The DNA matched the markers of Jimmy Hoffa's family. It was him. They had found Hoffa. So what next? What else followed this discovery? Keep watching to find out. Jimmy's killer was smarter than the world. You'd think finding the body would bring the closure the world needed, but it didn't. The relief of finding Jimmy's body was soon short-lived, with a new discovery about the body. It was from the forensic dating, bringing a revelation more chilling than anyone could have prepared for. Forensic dating discovered that the body wasn't buried in 1975, the year Hoffa vanished. Imagine how stunned the entire team was. Hoffa's burial wasn't traced back to 1975, it was placed around 1995, 2 decades after his disappearance. The implications were staggering. If Hoffa's body had been buried 20 years later, it meant only one thing: someone had moved him. But who? And why? Why hide him beneath a ballpark, of all places? The shocks didn't stop there. As the excavation continued, investigators unearthed a second set of partial remains. Smaller, different, human. Another person, possibly another victim, or someone whose fate had been tied to Hoffa's. Suddenly, this was no longer just about Jimmy Hoffa. The dig site had transformed into something darker. A secondary crime scene, a vault of secrets deliberately concealed for decades. The case-breakers released a chilling statement. This is disturbing. The body was not only moved, but carefully tampered with. And with the discovery of additional remains, it is clear this story is far from over. The site was sealed off within hours. Federal investigators swarmed in. The FBI assumed control. Their silence was as telling as any statement they could have given. Yes, Jimmy Hoffa's body may finally have been uncovered, but the deeper mystery remains. Who orchestrated the cover-up? And just how much power did the people behind this really wield? Keep watching to learn more. Jimmy Hoffa before his disappearance. Jimmy Hoffa before his disappearance. led the International Brotherhood of Teamsters from 1958 to 1971. The Teamsters started as a union for drivers, but under Hoffa's influence, they grew enormously. At 18, Hoffa helped dock workers win better pay by organizing a strike. A year later, he began organizing for the Teamsters and steadily climbed the ranks. By the time he became president, Hoffa's reach was massive. At one point, the Teamsters controlled about 90% of U.S. transportation, and Hoffa's power inside the union was nearly absolute. Trouble followed him, though. In 1941, Hoffa and the Teamsters clashed with rival groups in Detroit. According to author Dan Moldia, that conflict is where Hoffa first made a dangerous choice. He enlisted the mob to remove his rivals. The tactic worked, but it came with a cost. After that deal, the Mafia's influence over Hoffa deepened. He was entangled with organized crime in ways that would haunt his career. The relationship between Hoffa and the mob was mutually beneficial. The Mafia tapped into the Teamsters pension fund, pulling out massive loans and funneling the money into building and financing Las Vegas casinos. In return, the Teamsters enjoyed strong returns on those loans. Despite his mob ties, Hoffa was deeply admired by workers. Under his leadership, wages and benefits improved, and he became a symbol of strength for the labor movement. For years, things ran smoothly. Through the 1940s and 1950s, Hoffa and the mob maintained a steady, if uneasy, alliance. But everything changed after Hoffa went to prison. In 1967, he began serving a 13-year sentence for bribery, jury tampering, and mail fraud. Just 4 years later, in 1971, President Richard Nixon granted him a pardon on one unusual condition. Hoffa was banned from any union activity until 1980. That pardon set off a chain of events that ultimately led to his downfall. By July 1975, federal investigators uncovered that the Teamsters' largest pension fund had been looted, hundreds of millions of dollars gone. Just 2 weeks later, Hoffa disappeared. The timing was too close to ignore. With Hoffa cut off from the union but free from prison, it's possible he threatened to expose the Mafia's siphoning of pension funds. If so, the mob had every reason to silence him before he could talk. Was the mob responsible for Jimmy's disappearance? How? Let's find out. The day Jimmy disappeared. July 30th, 1975, was the day Hoffa was seen. 62-year-old Hoffa was last seen outside the Machus Red Fox, a restaurant in suburban Detroit. According to notes he left for his family, he had arranged a 2 p.m. meeting with two men he knew well, Giacalone and Anthony Provenzano. Both were tied to the Mafia, and Provenzano was also a Teamster official. But there was a problem. Neither man showed up. When questioned later by the FBI, both denied that any meeting had been scheduled. On the surface, they even had solid alibis. Giacalone spent the afternoon at the Southfield Athletic Club, going out of his way to chat with acquaintances and strangers alike. Investigators thought this looked suspicious, as if he were deliberately parading himself around to prove where he was. Provenzano, meanwhile, was across the country in New Jersey, playing cards in a union hall with his brother, Salvatore "Sammy Pro" Provenzano. The timing of their alibis was almost too perfect, like they wanted to make sure everyone knew exactly where they were. When his supposed meeting fell through, Hoffa called his wife, Josephine, at 2:30 p.m. from a nearby payphone to tell her he'd been stood up. Witnesses later confirmed seeing him in the restaurant parking lot that afternoon, pacing and waiting. Hoffa was well known and recognizable, so there was little doubt it was him. Several witnesses reported seeing a burgundy Mercury Marquis pull into the restaurant parking lot with 3 men inside. Hoffa was spotted getting into the car, likely the last time anyone saw him alive. The next morning, July 31st, 1975, Hoffa's own car was still sitting in the Machus Red Fox parking lot, untouched. Years later, investigators uncovered evidence that seemed to back up those witness accounts. A strand of hair found inside a Mercury Marquis was tested and confirmed to belong to Hoffa, making it highly plausible that this was the vehicle used to take him to the place where he was killed. Witnesses also claimed the driver resembled Charles "Chucky" O'Brien, a longtime Hoffa associate often described as a surrogate son and protege. This detail mattered because Hoffa likely wouldn't have entered a car with strangers. But if O'Brien was inside, Hoffa may have felt safe enough to go along willingly. Who really was responsible for Hoffa's disappearance? O'Brien? Keep watching to find out. Hoffa never got justice. Despite this, O'Brien denied that Hoffa ever entered his car or that he played any role in the disappearance. Still, suspicions lingered. Investigators pointed to growing tension between Hoffa and O'Brien, suggesting that O'Brien resented Hoffa for not securing him better positions within the Teamsters Union. Hoffa's daughter later spoke out, saying that Charles "Chucky" O'Brien was driving the very car her father disappeared in near the Red Fox restaurant. Her reasoning was simple. If Hoffa's hair was found in the car, then he had been there. Investigators also noted that the car had recently been cleaned. O'Brien explained this away by saying he'd been running errands, including transporting a 40-pound package of salmon for a union official. According to him, the fish leaked blood in the back seat, which is why the car needed to be cleaned. But when German shepherds were brought in, they picked up Hoffa's scent in both the back seat and the trunk. Hoffa's son once confronted O'Brien directly, asking if he had played any role in his father's disappearance. Instead of answering, O'Brien abruptly fled the room, a response that only fueled suspicion. Despite exhaustive searches, both on the ground and through records, Hoffa's body was never found. But investigators reached a broad consensus on one point. The Mafia was almost certainly behind his death. In January 1976, federal investigators compiled what became known as the Hoffa's Memo. It outlined their belief that the Mafia, worried Hoffa might expose their control over the Teamsters and their use of the union's pension fund to finance criminal activities, decided he had to be silenced. Why would Hoffa betray them? One theory, detailed in the book I Heard You Paint Houses, suggests that Hoffa was so eager to reclaim power in the Union that he might have been willing to trade information with authorities in exchange for lifting his ban on Union activity, imposed in 1980 by order of President Nixon. Hoffa had also grown increasingly vocal about his desire to remove mob influence from the Teamsters and from its pension fund. Still, knowing the why didn't solve the who. 4 months into the investigation, New Jersey inmate Ralph Picardo claimed to have overheard details from one of Hoffa's killers during a prison visit. His information helped authorities draw up a list of suspects, most tied to Anthony "Tony Pro" Provenzano, the mobster Hoffa was supposed to meet the day he vanished. But when it came time to testify, every suspect invoked the Fifth Amendment. With no direct evidence and no one willing to talk, the case grew cold. How did the world receive this inconclusiveness? Would Hoffa's killers ever come to justice? Keep watching to find out. Speculations about Hoffa's disappearance. Speculation took off immediately. Rumors claimed he'd been buried under the concrete of Giants Stadium in New Jersey. Others whispered that his body was fed through an industrial shredder or sealed inside a steel drum at the bottom of the Great Lakes. Each lead seemed promising until it fizzled out like all the rest. Finally, in 1982, with no trace of Hoffa and no solid answers, the courts declared him legally dead. But even that official closure couldn't kill the legend. The mystery still breathes. Hoffa's disappearance grew bigger than the man himself. It became woven into America's cultural fabric. His name showed up in books, magazine covers, TV specials, and documentaries. Yet, after all the noise, one haunting question refused to fade. Where is Jimmy Hoffa's body? The search became a saga of false hopes and dead ends. Over the years, investigators chased leads across Michigan horse farms, New Jersey landfills, and every rumor in between. Each tip, no matter how wild or convincing, was followed with dogged determination. And every time, the trail went cold. The FBI, desperate to solve one of the nation's most baffling disappearances, poured resources into the hunt. High-profile digs turned into media spectacles. Helicopters hovered above search sites, casting long shadows over the ground crews below. Backhoes ripped into the earth. Forensic teams sifted through the dirt grain by grain, while TV cameras captured every movement, every pause, every glimmer of hope. But the result was always the same: nothing. One of the most famous digs came in 2006, when the FBI swooped down on the Hidden Dreams horse farm in Milford Township, Michigan. An anonymous tip had claimed Hoffa's remains were buried in a barn shortly after his disappearance. For days, excavators tore through the soil as forensic teams combed the site with surgical precision. The public held its breath, waiting for a breakthrough. But once again, the search turned up empty. It was a cruel reminder of how slippery the truth had become. One major theory points to Salvatore Briguglio, a trusted mob hitman, as Hoffa's killer. According to journalist Dan Moldia, author of The Hoffa Wars, Hoffa was lured to Roland McMaster's horse farm in Milford Township, McMaster being a tough enforcer for the Teamsters. Moldia even interviewed Briguglio before Briguglio himself was murdered. In 2006, the FBI searched the horse farm for Hoffa's remains but came up empty. Still, Moldia maintains that Briguglio carried out the hit at the farm, after which Hoffa's body was stuffed into a 55-gallon drum. The barrel, he claims, was then loaded onto a gateway transportation truck and hauled to a mafia-controlled landfill in New Jersey. Notably, the president of that trucking company also happened to be a trustee of the Teamsters Pension Fund, further linking union power, mob muscle, and Hoffa's fate. Another leading theory implicates Anthony "Tony Pro" Provenzano. Federal investigators suspected that Provenzano ordered Hoffa's murder, fueled by a bitter feud that had begun years earlier when the two served time together in a Pennsylvania prison. Their rivalry grew so intense that they reportedly despised each other. Hoffa's son later suggested that Provenzano, as his father's sworn enemy, had been pulling strings behind the scenes, possibly influencing Frank Fitzsimmons, Hoffa's successor as Teamsters president. If Provenzano feared Hoffa's comeback, threatened his power and mob ties, orchestrating Hoffa's disappearance would have been the ultimate solution. Would justice ever be served, or would the world just move on? Let's find out. Forgetting him. As the years rolled on, the urgency of Hoffa's disappearance began to fade. Headlines moved on, and new scandals stole the spotlight. Yet the case never truly let go of America's imagination. Cold case units were formed, armed with the latest forensic tools and fresh determination. They hoped to crack what generations of investigators had missed. But every trail circled back to the same void. No answers, just shadows. Time, too, became an enemy. Witnesses who might have known the truth slipped into old age, their memories fading, their voices lost. Investigators who had once fought to solve the case retired, some passing away without closure. With each passing year, the odds of ever finding Hoffa seemed to shrink. The man who once commanded the loyalty of millions was becoming little more than a ghost, a symbol of mysteries America could never solve. And yet, in the quiet margins of the story, something unexpected stirred. A loose band of volunteers, ordinary people with no official badge, no chain of command, began digging into the case themselves. Free from the red tape that slowed the FBI, they chased leads with nothing to lose and everything to prove. They weren't ready to let Jimmy Hoffa's story disappear into history. Behind the scenes, the small group of volunteers pressed on, quietly piecing together scraps of evidence and building a theory they believed could finally crack the case. What they uncovered would soon ignite a fresh wave of hope. Decades later, Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance had drifted into the realm of myth, half history, half legend. It lived on in whispers of conspiracy, late-night debates, and the occasional Hollywood retelling. But then, a new documentary surfaced, and its claim was explosive. Hoffa's body was buried beneath the Pulaski Skyway in New Jersey, a bridge that loomed over territory long ruled by the mob. The film laid out its case with unnerving precision. An anonymous but reliable source. Soil tests point to unusual disturbances, and perhaps most compelling, the site's proximity to mob-controlled hangouts. The theory felt chillingly plausible. and the public latched onto it instantly. The frenzy was impossible to ignore. The FBI, sensing the weight of public interest, launched a full-scale investigation. Crews descended on the Skyway, backed by high-tech tools, drones mapping every inch from above, engineers sweeping the ground with penetrating radar, searching for voids beneath the surface. For weeks, the excavation unfolded like a high-stakes drama. News anchors delivered live updates from the roadside. Commentators speculated endlessly. Could this finally be it? Would the mystery of Jimmy Hoffa end beneath this bridge? The anticipation built and built until it collapsed. When the dirt settled, there was nothing. No remains, no evidence, no Hoffa. Just another crushing dead end in a saga that had already stretched nearly half a century. The public's reaction to the failed Skyway dig was a cocktail of disbelief and frustration. Yet, strangely, the search had proven something far more enduring than bones in the ground. After nearly 50 years, Jimmy Hoffa's mystery still gripped America. It wasn't just an investigation anymore, it was a symbol of unanswered questions, of power and betrayal, of a man whose story refused to be buried with him. Hoffa was gone, but his legend was not until now. What do you think about Jimmy Hoffa's body finally being found? Let us know in the comments section below. Thank you for watching this video. We hope you found it interesting. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Click the next video shown on your screen to catch up on your favorite celebrity stories. See you there.